Good morning. Welcome to Uncaged. She became visible. I'm Renee Steelman, your host, and I have got a lazy learner on my show today. And let me just explain to you, one of my favorite things about podcasting is it forces me to look into things that I've been thinking about, but not really studying. And when I find people as articulate and as knowledgeable in a certain field as my guest is today, it just lightens me up. And Lance Kennedy is my guest. And let me just tell you a little bit about why I call Lance a lazy learner. He is a former assistant United States attorney, former assistant district attorney, U.S. Army judge advocate, seven federal jury trials plus 50 Texas trials, holds degrees from Southern Methodist University Law School, Harvard University, and University of Texas at Austin. He has worked with the FBI, the IRS, the DEA, the ATF, the HSI, Border Patrol, Texas Rangers, and local law enforcement agencies. So obviously he doesn't know what he's talking about, right? So let me bring on Lance so that we can get going. We are going to be talking today about one of the things, mainly the rebranding of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I'm going to let Lance talk about his background. And he and I have a lot of things in common. And I think what eases us into talking about the rebranding is the fact that we don't come from a Mormon background. Neither one of us were raised in the church. So we were... I was raised Methodist, he was raised Pentecostal, and I'm going to let him talk about that more. But when you are raised outside of the bubble of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, you're able to see the good people that are out there, the theology that you were taught, and the beliefs that you were taught, and how they either commingle or they completely are opposite of what the church teaches. Now, I was 12 when my parents joined the church. Basically, I just went along for the ride. The missionaries that were teaching us were really cute, and that was what the most important thing was in my life. But Lance is going to talk a little bit more about his, obviously, when he states that he graduated from the Southern Methodist University, there was some religious even in his education. So I'm going to stop talking and bring Lance on, and he's going to tell you a little bit more about his background. So good morning.
Hey, good morning, Renee. Thanks for having me on.
Oh my gosh, I am so excited. I have to tell you, I saw you and met you through your podcasting on some other platforms. And in both cases, I feel as though you weren't really given a chance to really tell the world about the research that you have done in not only church history, but also in the rebranding of the church that you joined as an adult. And I felt like on both of the podcasts that I watched you on, there was a little bit of defensiveness for the church, which you were never antagonistic against the church at all. But there was a little bit of and I've seen this in some of the apologists, where they want to make sure that everyone understands that, look, the LDS church is not the only church that's struggling with faith right now, the entire Christian community. And I'm like, great, let's get back to what we were talking about. And, or just a lot of information that, you weren't really given the chance to talk about the research that you've done. So I thought I got to have him on, because I as well have seen the rebranding, and I'm like, what, am I the only one that sees this? And I think because I mentioned, and you tell me if you think this is true too, because we weren't raised, I didn't grow up in Utah. I didn't go to school with a lot of Mormon kids. I had one best friend that was LDS, and I went into the Navy. Nobody else in the Navy was, in this church. And so I've always seen the world out there. And so when I see it, I like, well, wait a minute, that isn't what I've been, over 50 years as a member of the church. So anyway, so I'm going to shut up and I want you to introduce yourself, talk about your background, and then we'll get going on the subject.
Well, Renee, again, grateful for the opportunity. And, in terms of my background, what I think would be probably the most important thing for your listeners is kind of, along with what you said, your own story is, in that I really don't have any familial connection with the LDS Church or Mormons writ large. I'm almost entirely Southern, of Southern descent. Do have some family from Illinois and elsewhere, but my point is that we come from a very traditional Southern background, which mainly derives from Anglicanism, Methodism, the Baptist churches, and Churches of Christ. And then, of course, the derivation of churches that came after that. So I was raised, as I mentioned, Pentecostal, not in the classical Pentecostal. So if you or your listeners are familiar with like the United Pentecostal Church or Church of God, those would be considered, or Assembly of God, those would be considered more classical Pentecostal churches. I was raised in neo-Pentecostalism, and that's where women could cut their hair and wear makeup, and we owned TVs, and so it was a little bit, I would say, more friendly to the modern world, and also more integrated in that sense, but definitely held a lot of the theological norms of Pentecostalism. And my father was a megachurch pastor and televangelist in Dallas. So I got not only the kind of religious upbringing, but also saw it as, a business with, and I don't mean that in a derogatory sense. I mean that in the sense of, it has a goal, right, which is either conversion or attendance or donations as part of its operations, and then how do you structure your messaging and branding and organization to maximize whatever goal you're after. And so that became a real passion of mine. Early on was kind of looking at religion, and I think initially it may have been somewhat unwitting, but like I later probably became more conscious to, a unique view of the way I see religion in terms of, its organization and behavior, corporately and things of that nature. So that may give you a little bit of context of my background.
Yeah. Where was your mom in this, working with your dad as far as the church goes? What was her position? What was her role?
Yeah, and that's really interesting. So, Pentecostalism, neo-Pentecostalism, they're typically fairly conservative churches. One thing they I think you would consider them a little bit more progressive is the role of females in the pastorate. So there was never an issue with female ordination. My mom was ordained; she was a co-pastor. That's particularly common. So when you look at like outliers, they hold to traditional forms of marriage, Pentecostal churches like Assembly of God, but they're much more loose when it comes to female pastors. Now there's some nuance there, of course, but yeah, so she was a co-pastor. She kind of led the women's ministry, which was kind of, Relief Society, if you want to compare it to that.
Right.
And then she also was the main producer of their television program, which was called Family and Friends. So that was like her role, was mainly television and women's ministry. And she preached quite a bit. And
that's amazing.
So yeah, very active.
So, okay. So coming from that background then, how old were you when you joined the church? And tell a little bit about your conversion. And the
Sure.
reason I'm asking that was when you saw that women were not allowed to be co-pastors, were you a little bit like, huh?
I think, I found, so I'll put it this way, from a theological perspective, I found the way Pentecostals, or at least my dad's church, which was more of what's called, they came out of what's called the latter rain movement. It had a very squishy ecclesiology. So the theology behind like why we call them pastors versus a prophet versus a bishop, the titles were all kind of interchangeable. So I don't know if I was particularly convinced by the theology of the church and why they ordained and didn't ordain. But no, I mean, I'm a guy, so I think I was kind of blinded, frankly, towards that issue, and that's on me. I didn't really think about it in those terms. But yeah, in terms of like my conversion experience, I found the church through anti-Mormon literature. We watched the Godmakers during Sunday school in about 8th grade, and I just found it to be hilarious. Like it's ridiculous in its own way. It's truthful in many ways, but it's over the top. And so, my buddies and I got a real kick out of it, and so that kind of kicked off an interest in the church, and eventually I was able to join once I left home, and that was in Chevy Chase, Maryland, outside of DC.
Oh my gosh. So you were interested in it, but you waited until you were over 18. You've left the home. Had you gotten into your education yet?
Yes. Well, I had wanted to join in high school, but it was like a foregone conclusion with my family. You couldn't do it. Like I couldn't even go to like local Baptist churches or Bible churches. Like I couldn't visit other churches because they were competitors. And so the way that the way my parents would phrase it was like, if people see you there, it'll be a problem for us because they're going to wonder, why is the pastor's son of this other church not at his church?
Yeah.
I always thought that was really dumb. It caused me a lot of spiritual trauma, frankly, because I was kind of boxed in. And but yeah, eventually I was able to make my way into the church when I turned 19, and so was baptized there, and then became active in the YSA ward at UT Austin. And so it was right at the beginning of my college career.
Okay, so you didn't serve a mission?
No, I didn't.
Okay, and you married someone that you met at church and active and married in the temple?
So it was a delay between joining the church. I went inactive fairly soon after joining, and that lasted for probably about 5 or 6 years. And then once I got into my career after law school, that's when I revisited the church and became active again. I met my wife, though, on the mutual dating app, which is kind of like Tinder for Mormons.
Yes.
And so she's an entertainment attorney, and she was based in LA, and I was an attorney in Austin, and we connected, and we were married about 1.5 years after we met.
Oh, that's so great. I love that. Well, talk a little bit about your love for the church, your love for the way the institution was taught, and the teachings that you were like, yes, I love this. And the reason I asked that is because I remember, because I grew up with the David O. McKay, Spencer Kimball, Ezra Taft Benson, Gordon B. Hinckley was my favorite prophet. I felt like he was the only prophet that just really loved the people. He really truly loved people. And I remember every time I would watch him at conference, I felt like he was always saying, you guys are doing so good. Just do your best. Just really try hard. And just, you're doing really good, but just try harder. But I never felt condemned or shamed or anything like that. And I'm a little bit sad of some of the newest historical things I've read, but I just loved him. But I grew up with the David O. McKay, the positive, you're peculiar people. We love being peculiar people. Of course, we're different. We love being different. Difference is what makes us the true church of God. And you're not going to fit in all the time, but you should celebrate that you don't fit in. And I remember, I think I told you this, Lance, I remember at my baptism at 12, I did have an aunt that had been a member of the church for quite a long time, but she was the only one in her family. Her husband never joined. He did later, deathbed. And her 2 kids were never really active in the church. And she didn't push it on people. But when I would go and stay with her, we would go to church on Sunday, and it was no big deal. So she was there at the baptism. My cousin was there, and I went to put on my little cross necklace. And she said, "Oh, you can't wear that." And I went, "Why?" She goes, "Mormons don't believe in crosses." And I was like, okay, whatever. I'm 12. And, but that, and I remember Gordon B. Hinckley talking about why we don't have crosses on our buildings. And I'm like, that makes so much sense. I love that makes us different. So when I heard you talk about some of the changes, I was like, yeah, it's starting to kind of bother me a little bit. I sang to my children, 6 kids in our red station wagon, and we would sing, "I'm a Mormon, yes, I am," and I want to be a mom, when I grow up, and all the songs that, Brady wrote that we all sang along with. And now I'm kind of like, wait a minute, I can't even call myself a Mormon anymore. What's going on? So tell everyone what was your spark that got you going, wait a minute, what's happening here?
Yeah. So, what drew me into the church, because I was often asked was, was it the Book of Mormon? Was it something, that drew you in particularly about, the Book of Mormon? Did that give you the testimony? And it really wasn't. It was largely a fascination with the person of Joseph Smith, and kind of the religious genius that he possessed. And then also just the story of the Mormon people. It's such a powerful, like the Exodus across the plains, and it's just a very otherworldly kind of experience. And I think I was also looking for or searching for identity because I'm kind of a generic American. I'm a Texan, but religiously, I would say there really wasn't much in terms of the background. Again, it was amorphous. One generation before me was Church of the Nazarene. Right before that was Methodist. And so it's just there was nothing grounded in it, and from like a tradition to kind of bind me to an identity. So I found a lot of that in Mormonism, in part because of its peculiarity and how it stood out and apart as a rebellious force, to wider American culture. So, the things that I liked about it were often the things that I found most members, Mormons, didn't like talking about. Things like the temple, right? This like really unique, or some of the peculiar doctrines about God, or so forth, metaphysics, and they just weren't interested in it. Or maybe that it was taboo. Like they might have been interested, but it's just like deep doctrine you don't talk about. So I was already kind of primed for, again, being interested in that, contra the broader American evangelicalism that I grew up and came from. So when I started, particularly in about 2018, picking up on a lot of verbiage changes,
Yes.
imagery, aesthetics, revisions to the endowment, I would say more broader alliances with other Christian groups. There was a number of changes, right, that all coalesced right at the beginning of President Nelson's tenure as the president of the church. And so I picked up on it pretty early because it started feeling very familiar to what I experienced in the late 90s and early 2000s growing up in again, my dad's church, because we were very piped into the trends and the changes that were happening in evangelicalism. I mean, this was the switch from the analog to the digital age.
Yeah.
So I remember them having to change over their television program from beta tapes to digital, to the internet becoming a force in church and recruitment and branding and missionization, to the way that church was spoken about, to the way we dressed when we went to church. So I was already kind of primed, I think, to start sensing a lot of these changes. And then when they all happened within a fairly short period of time, over a couple period of years, I was like, okay, there's something happening that's there's a causal force basically behind the scenes that has to be directing these, because they're all monodirectional. All the changes are going in one direction, which we could talk about what that is, but there's clearly a concerted effort and a plan that's behind, again, the verbiage, the changes, the doctrinal emphasis, the administrative and ecclesiological changes. Just from a broad perspective, I just started picking up on it. And then I decided I was going to do find an empirical way to start showing people that, hey, this isn't merely my subjective perception. It's something I could document and show people it's actually empirically proven.
That's so true. I don't know if you've done any statistics, but do you think that people that were converted to the church, they weren't raised in the church, are recognizing that more than people that grew up with the church, and they're just kind of indoctrinated to this whole revelation, line by line, precept upon precept type of mentality? but where like you know, where it's like, wait a minute, that's the way my dad preached, or those are the words we used in that church. But, you know, because I grew up with the, I know there's a term for it, where you go to church on Easter and Christmas and, you know, some kind of marriage or something like that. So my family wasn't particularly religious, but we said grace before our meals. And so I grew up with, you know, a bless this food type thing, you know. Let's see. Oh, and now I lay me down to sleep, and my prayer. And I kneeled at my bed, you know, and said my prayers. There was pictures of Jesus in our home. My parents smoked, they drank coffee. My dad got together with his 8 brothers and sisters and played poker. My one of my aunts was extremely Baptist. She's my godmother. She was designated my godmother. So these were all terms that I was used to, the crosses and things like that. So then when it went away and now it's back, I'm kind of like, wait. What's going on? This is very Methodist. You know, I'm hearing a lot of, you know, like say Protestantism into the word. So talk a little, and if you have anything now, we're going to be talking about 2 different. Oh, where'd you go? You're going to have to send me that link again. It disappeared. So I want you to talk about the fabulous data that you did pull up and the research that you did to start doing the comparison.
Yeah. So, you know, if you're trying to do a study to show how, you know, doctrines are being emphasized or not, or phrases are popping up that are unique, you know, you have to have a data set, and we have a perfect data set, which is the General Conference talks, because they're given twice a year. There's dozens of them. And then they're, of course, regular over time, over generations, and you can track who says things. And, you know, we know that the church is highly correlated, right? So, you know, in the 1960s, we call this the correlation era. It's when everything became very centralized, including messaging from the church. And so when you use the data set, which I believe, if I looked at it, it was 5,838 talks that were analyzed, 11.1 million words. So that's the data set. And when you started looking at patterns such as what I call generic piety, so things like you were saying, Renee, that you as a Methodist would be familiar with, same with a Catholic or a Baptist, like generic Christian terms. When you look at, for instance, the amount of quotes, the ratio between the Living Prophet and Joseph Smith, when you look at words like grace being emphasized, and a whole host of other different metrics you're looking at, it becomes very clear that there have been general trends over time, but right around 2018, there became a very dramatic shift in much of the language, verbiage, focus, and frankly, branding awareness of the church, which coincided again with the presidency of Russell M. Nelson. So what I kind of concluded, and we can kind of break down, you know, the actual findings, is that when President Nelson became the president of the church, you know, and this is my conclusion, is that there had to have been some type of internal discussion about a number of changes that they wanted to make. And the reason I think they made these changes, really to Protestantize, or rather adapt more broadly Christian imagery and focus on Jesus, it was really to stop or really abate the quick and precipitous decline of the church in terms of its membership and so forth. So I think it's the motivation can be definitely portrayed as like they want to evangelize and missionize and convert more people, but it really is also, I think, part of a preventative to keep people in the church as well.
Absolutely. I love, because I've said this, my husband is still an active member of the church. And so I'm always throwing things at him. He's so patient. And I always get him in the car, you know, where he can't escape. But, you know, Russell Nelson, he was my turning point, I have to say. I resigned my membership from the church about 5 years ago. And I have to say, there was just something that I felt very squirmy about all of these sudden changes. I mean, I felt like it was like I was constantly being hit with water, cold water, was like, what? And I know, we went through the temple in 1974. So we had the, early, we had the fabulous, what was the name of the guy that played Satan? He was so great, that famous, he was an actor, what's the word? I can't think of his name. Anyway, he was very dramatic, and I loved it.
A thespian. He was
yes,
yeah,
yes, totally. And Lance, talk about this too. I with my mom, she seemed to be very kind of ghost oriented. She loved the ghost stories. Like, I remember specifically when she told me about how Heber Kimball and they went on their mission to England, and all of a sudden, one of them was overtaken by evil spirits, and they prayed and they prayed, and those were the stories that stuck in my head. And we played the Ouija board, and we believe, my mom believed in visions, and she believed that when they celebrated my grandparents' 50th wedding anniversary, that she could feel her brother there that had passed away. Or when she was a temple worker in the Missouri and the Portland Temple and the New York Temple, she said, "Oh, I turned the corner and I saw Jesus." And I'm like, "You did? Wow." So she was very much into the other world and, revelations and this kind of stuff. So I grew up with, a guardian angel, feeling like I had a guardian angel, or relatives that would visit you from the other side. And so the temple ceremony for me was just like, woo, this is so fun. I never even thought about what this meant or what that meant or what this meant. And it was just part of the ritual. It was just a weirdo ritual thing. And so it didn't bother me at all. But when they started making the changes, the first one that they changed, I was older, and I was, way into my, 40s, when all of a sudden, no longer was I raising my hand and vowing to obey my husband, which had bothered me for quite a long time. And I thought that's good, but then they changed the movie, right? And all of a sudden, Eve and Adam are weaving baskets with palm trees behind them. And I'm like, did we leave Missouri? Are we now in Palm Springs? What are we doing here? And I thought, oh, that was a nice attempt, but that's not working for me, So the changes were also like, what is happening? I don't get this. So talk about that, because that to me was, I think, the beginning of what is happening. And Russell Nelson, again, I was like, and you mentioned this, I heard you on another podcast mention this, you are obviously a doctor, because you have got a God complex like I haven't seen in a long time. So talk about that.
Well, I am a lawyer, so I happen to be a little critical sometimes of doctors, but specifically to like the temple, of course, the famous changes that happened in 1990, where the penalties and so forth were removed, is the one that most people were familiar with. But then, of course, starting in about 2019, there were some dramatic changes, and they've continued, to a great extent, to the point where the actual ceremony, and this is, goes into some other research that I've done as well. I think the purpose has completely been recast, of like why you're actually doing this ceremony and what its ultimate purpose is. So, of course, he being Nelson added, whole parts to the endowment. They've reinterpreted different symbolic elements to be very Christ-centered. So it goes along with that. The artwork in the temples now are all about Jesus. So they've definitely, what you would call, is added a gloss to the endowment, to make it much more Christian feeling. They've removed things that now I think, most members wouldn't even understand, like Satan's apron, right? His power, symbol of his power and priesthoods, that's no longer in the endowment. So roughly, I would say the vast majority of the Masonic elements have been completely gutted, minus the actual tokens and the aprons. So they've basically taken the minimalist perspective of like, we're going to remove everything we can that's Masonic, but for what we can't take out because it'd be too much.
Ah,
So
interesting.
yeah, and so when you combine those changes where you're changing like literally something that's supposedly unchangeable, and then you combine it with again the changes to meeting houses to Jesus only, to the giant. I said it was a crucifix. It's really a passion statue of Jesus carrying a cross on Temple
Yeah.
Square. To a whole host of the name being reemphasized. And then of course also just the general conference talks and the amount of references to Jesus and Holy Week and things of that nature. Grace. I think it's, for instance, grace. The share I'm looking at actually a stat. Under President Nelson, references were 37%, almost 38% between grace and works. Under President Grant, it was 9.5%. So roughly 4 times higher amount of grace compared to works. So what we've seen is really a sea change towards, definitely the church is more conscious of it. It's Christian bona fides. It wants to be known as a Christian organization. It wants its members to feel like they're Christian. But kind of, my concern would be more broadly is like at what cost?
Yeah.
Because identity is so important. And I think adherence to a religion, particularly one that's, demands a lot of you. It requires a lot of benefit. And one of the benefits you get from being a Mormon was you had this really distinct, rich community and identity. I think we're going to lose that. And so that's one of my bigger concerns about a lot of these shifts.
Yeah. That's exactly what I thought as I've watched it. And I'm going to play a little clip here from, there's an apologist that's very famous, very famous, but she's a very popular apologist in the LDS Church. And she kind of went through some of the changes in the timeline. So I'm going to play that a little bit and have you comment on each of them. But I do think that I would love to have been a fly on the wall in, like you say, that committee meeting where they started saying, look, Mormonism is getting a bad name. We're going to change the name. We're going to change the logo. We're going to change the temple ceremony. We're going to change Temple Square. We're going to change the temple. And we're
going to take Moroni. We're going to take Moroni off of temples. We're going to do a whole, and that's what I'm saying is like, I'm trying not to be exhaustive, but as you can see, like things you're naming, things that I'm naming, they all point in one direction, which is an attempt, a desire to portray the church as this very, I think, middle of the road Christian organization and downplay its distinctives. This is what, we call seeker sensitivity or the church growth movement. I've mentioned before with evangelicalism in the late 1990s, Rick Warren's book, The Purpose Driven Church, kind of inaugurated this movement. But the attempt then, just like the Catholic Church during Vatican II, was to try to re-engage modernity or post-modernity and to really show a new side of yourself rather than being some type of withdrawn institution or something that's very other. It's really engaging with the culture. I think that's kind of what's happening now with the LDS Church.
Yeah. So, okay, let me play this little thing that Jasmine went through. I hate having to highlight her, but she did it in such a concise way. I'm like, okay, I'm just going to steal you.
Nelson unlikely to transform Mormon Church as new president. NBC News gets the award for a headline that did not age well from 2018 because I believe President Nelson has incited more change than any other church prophet in the 21st century, and here are the top 10 reasons why. This is all in chronological order, not order of importance, but beginning in August of 2018, the church began essentially a rebrand where they discarded use of the word Mormon to use the full name of the church and introduced a new symbol, all of which to point more to Jesus Christ. In June of 2018, the church announced it was going to be releasing a new hymn book to replace the old one and the children's songbook, combining it all into one and expanding our cultural palette and introducing more traditional Christian songs as well as some new composition.
Okay, let me stop it right there. Okay. I don't know if you've been to church since they've introduced the new hymn book, but it is a kick in the head to try to listen to Mormons sing these Christian church songs that they didn't grow up with, like people in some of the other. Have you noticed that at all?
Yeah, I think we've sang Amazing Grace about 30 times this year. I joke, but it seems to be the case. And on that hymn alone, like that was my lullaby when I was a little kid, was Amazing Grace. So it holds a very special place to me. I don't think it's appropriate to be sung an award because it's, Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. That's very like Reformed Calvinistic language about depravity. It doesn't sound very Mormon, in terms of this expansive view of the human condition. So, but yeah, I mean, This Little Light of Mine, they're singing, a cappella kind of gospel songs now. It's interesting, to say the least.
Yeah. I know, even as an active member, I remember when the Tabernacle Choir would sing some kind of a spiritual, and I go, no, you guys are white. It's not working. Your little swaying back and forth is, just let it go. Just stick to a Welsh song, with an organ. I don't know. But yeah. So
Dives of Lazarus or something like that.
Yeah.
I'm Renee. I'm looking at some of the changes too. So January 1st, 2018 was the curriculum overhaul. We had a bunch of changes in January of 2019, including the temple changes. Women got the priesthood power October of 2019. Yeah. That's when President Oakes, I think, is the one that kind of
you've always had it. Yeah,
you didn't know about it, but you've always had it. The 4 years were Christ-centered only. May 11th of 2020, June 7th, 2021, priesthood session ends. Okay. Nelson was sustained in January of 2018. Then this was one that I thought was really interesting, was the Rome Temple dedication, because there was a quote. So this was a quote that I really latched onto in the temple. So, why Rome? Why was this so central? Well, because Rome is, of course, the traditional heart of Western Christianity. It's the city of Peter and Paul. It's where the Pope is at, right? You have the Vatican there. So the church builds a temple there, which is really, there aren't many saints in Italy. It's to service mostly Americans that are tourists or traveling, which is fine. I don't have a problem with it. But it's the very first time the Q15 were together outside of the U.S. And one of the things that President Nelson did was, of course, take a picture of himself next to Peter holding the keys, which is basically, what the Pope is claiming is the logo of the Vatican is the cross keys of Peter. But President Nelson said, this is really interesting. He said, the dedication of the Rome, Italy temple is a hinge point in the history of the church. And he said that it was published by Church News and Deseret News. And I really latched onto that because if you look at the hinge point comment and all these array of changes that happened in his presidency, this was kind of the fulcrum. And I believe, it is a good explanatory quotation of what he means. Like, why would he say, what does it mean to be a hinge point? Why did he do it there? I think that this was the hinge point because a hinge means a change is, it's the time when the church is going to bounce back from the decline that I think he perceived. And much of what President Nelson did was, I think, an attempt to one-up President Hinckley.
Oh, my gosh.
So for instance, back in, was it 1990, President Nelson, then Apostle Elder Nelson, said, don't use Mormon, it's a nickname, so forth. 6 months later, President Hinckley says, actually, it means more good, you can use it. Fast forward, right, 29 years, and he's reversing the name as soon as he becomes prophet. He's announcing more temples than President Hinckley ever did. Temples that probably will never be built because they're bottlenecked at about 7 a year in church headquarters. So I definitely think, though, that what he meant by this was he was finally going to get the changes put out that he had wanted to for a long time, that he believed would jumpstart the church and prevent its decline. And in my opinion, while they're being painted as like real revelatory, I think they're pretty old hat. I mean, again, they're exactly the same playbook that the Catholics and Protestants use in the 20th century. It's just we're 25 years behind the curve or so. Yeah,
that was, my kids were all born in the late 70s, 80s. And so, I don't know how much when I watch conference, I hadn't even registered the 1995. We shouldn't use the word Mormon. And then, the very next 6 months later, Hinckley's like, it's fine. We're good. And I didn't even click until I saw that. And then, as you say, you could see the like, oh, you did 27 temples, or you did 15. Watch me now. Like,
yeah, they're gonna be bigger.
Yes.
And And then also, there was, with President Nelson as well, there was the language shift, and that's kind of the big key. That's where we were talking about some of the names. So, like, for instance, there has been a general upward trajectory in like grace, like since even President Grant. So it's been a long-term trend, but it's been a very slight one. Almost. But in 2018, it skyrockets. Again, it's roughly 3.5 to 4 times higher than it was under President Grant. The mention of like godhood went down, or the gods, to 0 under President Nelson. I think it's been, if I said 15 years, someone could correct me, but since Abraham chapter 4 has been created or quoted, where it talks about the gods created the heavens and the earth, they've basically phased out that scripture. I'm looking at Holy Week, right? So Holy Week
I was going to ask you about that. Talk about that.
Yeah, so I just started hearing this phrase all the time, like right in General Conference, Holy Week, Holy Week. I'm like, this isn't a term I've ever heard in the church. And so this was one of the things I looked at in all the General Conference talks. Occasionally, so like I'm looking at the date. So 1993, there was one reference to Holy Week under Ezra Taft Benson. Okay. And that phrase, right, was only about like this Holy Week, like talking about, the general passion narrative. It was always a one-off comment. When you look at President Nelson, there were, I believe, 62 talks that mention and reference Holy Week as a phrase. Yeah. It was clearly a concerted effort, and not just him, but across the board, to use this phrase Holy Week. Yeah. And this also coincides with President Oaks talking about we need to really make Easter more important. Well, here's the question. Were Mormons lacking beforehand? Like, was the church lacking? I think most people say no, it wasn't. Yeah. So then why the refocus? Again, I think it's a brand issue, because it's very familiar to Catholics and Protestants what they mean, but it's an alien term that's being incorporated. And so, you have to ask the question of why the coordinated effort. People can draw their own conclusions, but the data still shows that this is now a phrase that's entered the Mormon lexicon, and it never was before. But this is only one data point. I mean, there's a lot of them that are very similar. Yeah.
What are some of the other ones? Because let me see if I can get Jasmine on here just a little bit, just to, because I loved how some of them were like, ugh,
Are we safe to share the screen? Do you think, or do you?
Oh yes, go ahead. Send me your link.
Or do you want me to share it?
You share it. Yeah, I can't get my share to work.
No problem.
Yeah.
Let's see which one. Okay. All right. Can you see this, Renee?
Yes.
Okay. I'm just going to start at the top just to kind of go through it. So again, it's the reformationindex.jerusalemanathens.com. Long URL, but it's where I could host it. And again, 5,838 talks, over 11 million words. That's the data set. It's public. You can go to the BYU Scripture Citation Index and do your own reject study. If anyone wants to, use the data set, it's open source. So what it did was it tracked multiple metrics that show a drift in the language, right? If not a spike in the language towards Protestant verbiage. And so, for instance, the Reformation Index, this is the composite score. So all of these metrics kind of aggregated. You can see there's been this general trend line from 1942 to the early 2020s. But it really spikes right here, which is 2018, when President Nelson becomes the prophet. You can see here the curriculum overhauls. There's some notes that were kind of added. But, for instance, the new logo, Moroni's off the temple, they added these quasi-female 70s, right? The women's area org advisors in Europe. Yeah. They have the cross-bearing Christ statue. And what I think is interesting is a lot of these changes, they're being chalked up to like administrative changes. So when you hear a lot of people talk about it, it's like, well, these are just little adjustments. They're not. And I'm sitting there going like, no, these are like major shifts. Yeah. So for instance, this is quotations by Joseph Smith versus quotations from the Living Prophet. You can see here in Heber J. Grant, George Albert Smith. I mean, there's a big wide gap. It does narrow, okay, but it really wasn't until, again, President Nelson that you see the complete inversion. There were, like this year, Gordon B. Hinckley was quoted more. Here, Spencer W. Kimball, like it definitely, or excuse me, here you go, Spencer W. Kimball. It did happen on occasion, but if you look at the Nelson years, it's almost every single year.
Yeah.
Minus the bicentennial year.
Yeah.
That Joseph Smith was quoted less. And so this is a question. Why is that the case? Why?
Right.
So we could chalk it up to him being a surgeon, right? You could say messianic complex, whatever. I don't like psychologizing people.
Yeah.
I think it was a strategic play. It was in coordination with the deauthorization of the journals of discourses.
Oh.
Because what they were doing was, when they basically said this is not an official publication of the church, if you go on the website, the church's website, there's actually a note about it. And it basically says these are not official publications. There's transcription errors. Well, the very first page for your listeners on the Journal of Discourses is a official publication of the first presidency of the church. There's a note on it. So why would they do that? They did that to unmoor the church from its 19th century theology, refocus the church on the living prophet. Therefore, Mormonism can be whatever you want it to be, whatever the current guy says it is. And that coincides directly with the references to President Nelson. So what I'm saying is there's been a decoupling of the church from anything prior to, let's say, 1920, 1930.
Yeah. Yeah.
They've really decoupled it. They've gotten rid of the phrase Mormon. There's basically no vestiges left of the 19th century church. And then you can see here, Living Prophet quotes Joseph Smith again. I think these were actually mentions of the prophet. This here is quotes. And you can see again, the Nelson years being an outlier.
Yeah.
So nothing happens in Mormonism without it being coordinated and correlated. And so this all happened, I guarantee, over some long-term plan, that this was going to be the make or break moment for the church. Another section 3 is Mormon distinctives versus Protestant vocabulary. And by the way, Renee, it's your show. You interrupt me if you need to.
No.
Well, you can see the ratio. It went from roughly 11.95 to 1 to 8.37. So there's still about 8 times more distinctive Mormon phrasing, but it's decreased quite a bit, as you can see, by roughly a third under President Nelson. And I think it is the low point was 2021. Same thing with vocabulary is rising. You can see the trend line, but you can see here under Nelson, it was rising again. This one's really interesting. Grace first works. So, I grew up in a very grace-oriented church.
Yeah.
And so we were not legalistical whatsoever. Very grace, oriented. You sin, you ask for forgiveness, you're good. You say the prayer once, you're good. So a lot of the grace language, particularly from Romans, is very familiar to me. You can see here again, consistent across the board of the Nelson years versus previous. Again, there would be spikes, but there was a concerted effort again to emphasize grace. Started in 2015 under Monson, incidentally, really the twilight years of President Monson. But it was a push by Bednar and Uchtdorf and others, as well as outside of the church hierarchy with Brad Wilcox. His Grace is Sufficient, The Infinite Atonement, some of these books. I think they're very theologically dubious, to be honest with you. But the point is that there was clearly a concerted effort to address that. Same thing with, I don't like the term theosis. I use it because a lot of people do, but hard exaltation, meaning godhood, like ontologically, you become God, or a God, I should say.
Yeah.
As you can see, it's hit rock bottom. They're basically abandoning any public mention of these particular doctrines.
Yeah.
And same thing, liturgical calendar spike with Holy Week. This is LDS materialism, so God having a body, like a corporeal deity who lives on or near a star called Kolob. Those are being basically phased out, or roughly kind of, I call it memory hold versus the generic piety, grace, things of that nature. Here are some interesting finds about just different apostles that shifted in different directions. Some of them shifted actually less away from grace, some more, but that could just be coincidental. Let's see down here. And then I give you the methodology as well. As you can see, President Nelson, he ranked number one by far in every single category.
Oh my God.
So I mean, again, like my whole, and I'll kind of leave it with this, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen in a second. But the point is that it's incontrovertible, undeniable. There has been a precipitous shift in the language of the leadership in how they're speaking publicly about the religion itself and its history, and that has profound implications and changes for the lived experience of the member. Right. And so that to me, again, when you don't have the binding, the cohesiveness, the distinctives that really demarcate you from others, for whatever they are. I mean, it could be, the underwear. I don't know. I'm just saying, like, whatever those boundaries are, when you start removing them, my prediction and anticipation is that instead of causing the decrease in membership and that adhesion to kind of stop or at least abate itself, I think it's gonna speed up the process, and we won't probably see the long-term impacts of it for 20 years. But I think in 20 years there's going to be a panic moment. I think that's my prediction, is in 10 to 20 years there'll be some moment of panic globally in the church, and they'll have to come up with some new solutions.
Yeah, you are absolutely right. I have thought the same thing. I thought, though, this is a generational thing. When there's living in Utah, we live in Utah for the summer, and we live in Arizona the rest of the time. So moving to Utah and being just dumped into this bubble here is really, I like to just sit. Sometimes I'll just sit in my car and watch people interact and walk by and things like this, and I'm kind of like, interesting, and I've never seen that before, And one of the things, I was sitting at an In-N-Out, and right across from In-N-Out is the Deseret Book, and I'm watching these people go in and out of Deseret Book, and I'm watching these new young girls. Some of them, they're young to me. Okay, they're in their 40s or whatever, 40s and 50s, and they're wearing the new sleeveless garments, and I'm noticing that they all have like a white trim around their sleeves. It's like a 1/4 inch of garment sticking out, or especially in the far back right here in this armhole part, there's like this much garment sticking out. And I posted something because I said, ask your mom what would have happened if she would have come to church in a nice cap sleeve, but there was a 1/2 inch of her white garment sticking out, or a skirt with a slit in the back, which most skirts have that so that you can walk in it. And, it was really hard to find a skirt that was long enough to cover that 1/2 inch that was going down to your knees, because garments used to have to go down to the knees. And I said, what they would do, someone would pull them aside and say, sister, your garments are showing. And now it just seems to be acceptable that, 1/2 inch of your garments are showing. And I'm just like, So then I noticed that they were going into this store that just opened, and it was called, I forget what it was called, but it was selling a garment, not garments, but like temple clothing, as far as white dresses and white skirts and white tops and new tank tops that you can wear with the sleeveless garments. And so I thought, I'm going in there. So I walked in there and I'm looking at these clothes and I'm like, these are old lady clothes, first of all. And then I noticed this nice tray full of jewelry with crosses on it. And I was like, I don't know what's happening here, but people are just throwing on those crosses, and they feel so, it's almost like a missionary effort. There's like, yeah, I have a cross too. You want me to tell you about my cross and how we, celebrate crosses? And I thought, okay, so I have to show you this. This is a sign by the new, like you were talking about, on Temple Square, they have the new Jesus carrying the cross. And I just want you to, it's so funny. It's like, Jesus Christ gave his life for us. Although Jesus Christ was found innocent, a crowd demanded that he be crucified or killed on a cross. As Christ carried his cross, many people followed and wept. After soldiers nailed him to the cross, He asked God to forgive them, hanging on the cross. Christ willingly died for humanity. Because of Jesus Christ's perfect love, he died to fulfill God's plan. He will ease our burdens and strengthen us. So I'm like, let's count how many times we've said cross in this sign, And but I just thought
it is very confusing.
yeah. It's amazing.
I mean, I didn't want to cut you off. I apologize. I mean, it is very confusing to me. Yeah.
It really is. And it's uncomfortable because I was taught, like I said, my favorite, prophet, Gordon Hinckley, made it so clear that that's not who we are. That's not what we're about. And we love the atonement. We love the resurrection. And that's what we worship. And we don't do this. And I'm like, I love that idea. And maybe that's just the way I was indoctrinated. But it is many of everything that you mentioned, and like you said, it's going to take 20 years because we aren't familiar with that doctrine. And it's going to take, when people talk about I love Jesus or Holy Week or Lent or giving up something for Lent. And I noticed there's a lot of LDS that did that. They went along with that this year. And I was like, what are you doing? What are we doing? And it's going to take a complete generation to even, like I said, we studied the gospel every 4 years. They touch on the Old Testament for an hour once a week. And then, 3 years later, we got the New Testament. And then 3 years later, we've got this. So when people talk about Jesus, I'm like, have you even read the Bible? Do you even know the teachings of Jesus as a Methodist or Pentecostal religion would teach? Or what do you understand what, like, Lance, tell me if it was you. I thought I heard, and I thought it was you. Someone said, I've never met a Mormon that if I said to them, if you died today, do you feel as though you've been forgiven? Was that you? Do you remember saying that?
No, it wasn't me. It
might have been Scott McDowell, because I've been listening to him a lot. I love him. He's a great guy, Christian. And he just said, I've never met a Mormon that can say that because they never feel as though they've really fully repented. And they've always got more that they need to do. And that's not what grace is. Grace is, I have been forgiven. If I was to die, I would be with Jesus. And so that whole idea of grace, I don't think is understood. But you comment on that. And then also, as we're getting ready to close, I want you to talk about the study of the occult that you've been doing, because that was that was probably, Lance, that was probably my shelf breaking moment, as the Mormons like to say. But I remember coming out of the bedroom, my husband was in the family room, and this is a man that's been a bishop and in the stake presidency and the whole bit. And I came on, I remember going, did you know that Joseph Smith translated the Book of Mormon with a rock and a hat? And he was like, what are you talking about? No, I've never heard that. And I was like, yeah, that's what they're teaching now. And I was just like, what? And like I said, with my parents being kind of like into the occult, talk about what you've done and what you're doing right now with that form of study and research.
Sure. Yeah. So first on the grace issue, I have, having studied Christian theology and its different forms. I mean, there's clearly grace is an integral part of salvation, of soteriology, right? The issue with grace in Mormonism is that with Mormonism, you have grace that saves you from outer darkness, that enables you to attain a kingdom of glory. But then works matter, including ordinances, about where you end up in the hierarchy, right? So there was a major works component that wasn't necessarily about salvation. It was more about exaltation, that you enabled yourself by perfecting yourself to be worthy of whatever kingdom of glory you're entitled to. So I think that I came into Mormonism really being concerned or suspicious of sloppy grace and sloppy grace language. I think Catholics and Orthodox Christians typically get it a little bit better, right, in terms of the balance between grace and works. But I felt like Mormons had this idea of grace plus works. It worked out. They weren't in competition with each other, but clearly works were an important part of the process. But what I'm seeing now is that the emphasis on grace, and I'll say this as well, I did always notice, though, and this was a downside of my experience in Mormonism, was scrupulosity. Not me
Yeah.
personally, but seeing others deal with it, where they never felt clean. They always felt like they could do something more. I have a friend who he's a I guess he's inactive in the church. He's still a member. His daughter got very ill, and it had a faith crisis around it. But even when he wasn't going to church, wasn't believing, I mean, he always felt like he had to help you more. Like he would come to your house at 2 a.m. He was baking bread for people. He just felt so compelled because of his upbringing that he always had to do better and better and better. And I saw that probably come out of that upbringing of, perfectionism. So I definitely see the negatives. What I'm warning people about, and what I feel like is my warning, is grace is wonderful. It's clearly part of the scriptures, but it has a role within Mormon theology that's now becoming, I think, I think it's being really, really becoming aberrated, becoming a problem, the way we're talking about it. And my fear would be, again, we lose some of the distinctives about working out your salvation with fear and trembling and works righteousness, and some of the distinctives that I think Joseph, reemphasized. So that's on the grace side. But in terms of, Joseph Smith and the Western esoteric tradition, what would you like to know about it? I'm happy, Renee, to tell me.
I know you mentioned when I heard you on another podcast, and you were just kind of introducing this and some of the occult, and even maybe talking about just some of the things that are kind of like slowly being introduced as where Joseph Smith was at, what his zeitgeist was.
Should we talk about masonry at all too?
Yeah, because I think that's important. I don't think people, you walk around Temple Square, you're looking over at the tabernacle and you see the eye, and I don't think anybody even puts, the compass or any of these things into any kind of understanding.
Right here. Yeah. So there you go.
There you go. Absolutely.
And I even got the beehive there. So.
Oh, now see, I love that. Talk about that, because to most people, the beehive is Brigham Young, right?
No, it wasn't. I mean, he may have been the one that introduced it, but it comes from Masonry. So the beehive. So for your listeners, you're familiar. I'm a Mason. I'm a past master of a lodge in Austin, Texas, Centennial Lodge number 500. I was the charter master of that lodge. I'm a past district deputy grand master, and I'm about to be a district deputy grand master again for this next upcoming year. And then I'm vice chairman of Masonic jurisprudence for the state of Texas. So we're kind of like the Masonic legal body that interprets and enforces Masonic law, which is, of course, an old tradition. It's an old fraternity. So we have law books that go back, like Anderson's constitutions, hundreds of years that we have to interpret. And then I'm a member of a variety of research and other invitational organizations. So spent a lot of time in Masonry, and part of the study of Freemasonry, particularly when you get into like the Scottish Rite and some of the other bodies, deals with what you would consider the Western esoteric tradition. So for instance, the Scottish Rite talks about the Kabbalah as the key of the mysteries, right? So this is what actually unlocks a lot of the concepts that Masons teach. Whether I believe that or not is another question, but the point is that, I definitely read fairly deep and wide in that whole tradition. It's probably good for me to define what I mean by the Western esoteric tradition. So within Western society and Western culture, Western civilization, we could kind of think about the basis of it being a three-legged stool. So you have Greek rational thought, Roman law is part of that as well. You have the Christian, Judeo-Christian tradition. And then finally, you have a third kind of prop for Western civilization, which is we call the Western esoteric tradition. It's all the rejected kind of concepts. So things like Rosicrucianism, the Kabbalah, Freemasonry, Hermeticism, what now we call the occult. That's kind of this third catch-all. That's not, again, Judeo-Christian theology or religious practice. It's also not Greek or Roman thought. It's this third something that's unique and part of the Western tradition. And so like in East Asia, India, there's esoteric or hidden traditions. Vajrayana Buddhism would be an example in Tibet. The West has its own mystery tradition. And so Freemasonry is kind of a modern or more modern expression of that. So when I started, of course, learning about Mormonism and Joseph Smith, I never thought, for instance, like, the seer stones, I knew about that from day one. It never bothered me, but in part because I, learned about it so early. And, I was reading, D. Michael Quinn, and, books like Quest for Empire and books on the Council of 50 and the Adam God Maze. And I was getting every book I could all the way through my investigatory period up until joining the church. And so when I came into the church, I knew about all this stuff. Like it was kind of part of the interesting history, what made it unique, that Joseph was potentially drawing upon as he thought of Freemasonry as a lost art of the priesthood. Yeah. So you can even look at, and this gets into my research, but you look at meeting minutes of the School of the Prophets in the Utah period, for instance, they were talking about astrology, and they eventually decided they didn't really want to talk about it, but it was discussed as a lost art of the priesthood. So I put all this together again. My research and study and background, in Freemasonry and studying the Western esoteric tradition, along with my interest in Mormonism, and have really found some really unique findings that I believe reveal some of the source texts that Joseph was using and being inspired by.
That's amazing. So I thought you mentioned a grimoire in some kind of, so talk a little bit about that, because that also, that, and also I noticed on one of your videos that I watched when you were explaining to some Masons about the LDS version of Masonry and how they use the symbols and things like that. And,
sure.
You mentioned something about anointing with oil. You called each other brothers. You talked a little bit about the secretness of the Masonic rituals. And you talked about the Morgan family and how Joseph Smith married the Morgan lady after her husband was disappeared. But
murdered.
Yeah, or murdered, So I loved all that. And I think that's the most important thing, is that you knew about this when going into the church. But yeah, talk a little bit about that, the grimoire, and so where Joseph Smith was coming from and the Masonic background and how that played into it.
Well, I mean, so when you look at like D. Michael Quinn or a lot of the discussions on Joseph Smith and magic or whatnot, it's usually spoken of as folk magic. That's what people kind of characterize it as. But what I'm arguing in the paper that I've recently submitted for review and publication by an academic publication is that Joseph was also engaging what we call high magic, which were more ritualized and structured forms of ceremony, okay, in the Western tradition. So you have folk magic, which is passed orally, things like, scrying or divining rods or things of that nature. That was, definitely passed on in a folk setting over a fire, or, grandma would teach you how to do this hex against the evil eye or something of that nature. High magic involved written text. And so what we found in looking at, a number of things in Joseph Smith, including direct language, they're all pointing towards the use of what is the Agrippa and Barrett tradition. Okay, so Henry Cornelius Agrippa, he wrote the 3 books of occult philosophy in the 16th century, maybe latter 15th, but very early post Middle Ages, post Renaissance. And then, of course, the English translation and distillation, which was the Magus by Francis Barrett, published in 1801. I think it was 1801. So the point is that number of phrases, and we're talking about exact phrases, exact number counts, are all pointing towards this one text that many have argued, including D. Michael Quinn, was in Joseph Smith's environment. We know that the family had access and used the book. For instance, there's the famous Mars dagger, which was a Smith family heirloom. It bore the symbols of Mars, which were keyed from the Magus, and was also the ruling governing planet of Joseph Smith Sr. So one of the accounts of actually the recovery of the golden plates involved the drawing of a circle with a dagger, probably that same dagger. But there's again, like the subtitle, for instance, and this is just maybe a coincidence if you want to believe it. The subtitle of the Mega says the Celestial Intelligencer. And within this book, there's things like the light being transferred, divine light through planets or intermediaries. If you read Abraham Facsimile #2, it talks about light coming from Kolob through Kai Van Rosh to Anishgo and Dosh, right? Those are the Sephiroth. You have prophets or angels being resurrected beings. The Abarit tradition also, in Agrippa tradition, involves how to evoke an angel for theurgic purposes, how to divinize yourself. And this ties into the endowment. So for instance, you would form a circle, right? Why do you form a circle? Well, you need a protective space to protect you from evil spirits that could inadvertently be summoned, right? So you would form a circle, you would banish it, and then you would call upon an angel or spirit 3 times. Once that spirit, and so if you were, you're in the temple, you would say a phrase prior to 1990, which was Peleel 3 times. And based on some etymological studies and other evidence, my conclusion is that Peleel was actually the transliteration of Peliel, Peliel, which is a misspelling, a very particular misspelling to Barrett and Agrippa of the preceptor or teacher of Jacob. So if you're familiar with the story from Genesis where Jacob wrestles the angel, he asks the angel, "What is your name?" That's Peliel. And so it'd be really, it's obvious that, you stand in a circle, you chant his name 3 times. Well, here's the connection to all of this. And I'll kind of, and again, Renee, clean it up and tell me if you need me to explain anything, because I don't want to ramble. The chronology is really fascinating. So I believe it was March 1842, Joseph becomes a master mason. So before that, 1839, he was actually already teaching people that they needed to test spirits, right? He didn't specify how, but he told the apostles before they went on their mission to England, they needed to be careful of false spirits and test them by shaking their hand. 1842, he's initiated into Freemasonry in March. In April of 1842, he publishes an article in the Times and Seasons called Try the Spirits. And it's about how you have to be able to test spirits because every religion has their own spirits. So how do you know if they're true or not? He says you have to be able to test them. Well, then he teaches the endowment 1 month later. And the entire telestial phase of the endowment, once he leaves the garden, Adam and Eve leave the garden until you're admitted to the terrestrial kingdom, is all about testing spirits. Why? Adam and Eve, they say, they use the gloss, the English translation of Peliel 3 times. Who comes first? Satan. And in the pre-1990 edition, Satan didn't come alone. He came with a Protestant minister. Well, what happens right after that? Peter, James, and John show up. They kick Satan out, and they tell the minister at this point, basically, well, you don't know truth because you were duped by Satan because he doesn't have the tokens. Well, what does Adam do? Well, how shall I know you to be a true messenger? Here's the sign and here's the token. So it's teaching you in the endowment the necessity of being able to teach. It's DNC 129 now. It's actually a section which encapsulates the need to handle something to know it's true. And the reason you need to do the handshake. So the celestial phase of the endowment is teaching you how to know if a spirit is truly a messenger from God. Well, what do you immediately do when you go into the terrestrial room? You form a circle, chant a name 3 times, which transliterates to an angel, Peliel, which is God's messenger. And now you have the technology that if an angel actually shows up, you can test them to know that you're receiving revelation from a true messenger. It's interesting as well that prayer circles, the true order of prayer, were practiced privately in homes and in stake centers up into the 1970s. Occasionally on eBay, you can actually find stake altars for sale. I found some for sale. So the point is I think right at the end of Joseph's life, he's teaching people the endowment. Yes, he's teaching you how to pass by angels that stand as sentinels, but he's also teaching you theurgy. how Mormon magic, in essence, how to bring God's spokesman in this world and call upon him. Because, I mean, I don't know about you, Renee, but like, I've never found anyone that can tell me why the true order of prayer is anything special. I mean, it's this thing you do one time that's very ritualized. It's just like a nifty type of prayer where God maybe listens to you a little bit more closely. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
What makes sense is that Joseph, within a month, is teaching you, you have to try the spirits. Here's how you do it. And then it's now canonized, right? So that's my theory is it all points again to Barrett's the Magus. Of course, there's more evidence. Like one of them is, so if you look at Abraham facsimile number 2, footnote number 5, talks about the 15 fixed stars or planets. Okay, so it says Kai Van Rasch governs 15 other fixed stars or planets. Well, that phrase 15 fixed stars, okay, is from a very particular tradition. It's called the Bahinian tradition. That's in Agrippa. And it's found nowhere else, like legitimately nowhere else. It's not in Masonry. It's not in, decanal Egyptian calendars, which like Hugh Nibley was trying to point to. It's not from any other tradition. It's this one particular tradition that either lists 15 or 18 stars, both of which are numbered and enumerated in Abraham. It's in the Magus. It's in the 3 books of occult philosophy. It's found nowhere else. So what I'm saying is this coalescence, a conciliant argument of evidence that Joseph, at the beginning of his ministry, when he was drawing potentially magic circles, I mean, Moroni, right, is summoned an angel on the autumnal equinox every year.
Yeah.
Right, which is an auspicious day. And if you look at some of the magical parchments, particularly the not the Holiness of the Lord parchment, the Jehovah parchment, which I like to tell members, these magical parchments were possessed by Elder G. Smith, who was sustained as a prophet, seer, and revelator, and the last presiding patriarch of the church. He's the one that owned them, said they were Hiram Smiths. They come from his lineage. So my point is that in terms of Mormon provenance, that's about as good as you get. The symbols from it largely come from early 19th century grimoires. And some of the symbols come directly from the Magus as well. And then I'll give you the final thing, which is the Jupiter talisman. So Joseph dies 1844. Emma remarries a man by the name of Biederman. They have a stepson together. And in 1902, an apostle and some other members of the church are visiting Nauvoo. And I think it was Louis Biederman, but he exhibits what he claimed was Joseph's medallion that he had on him when he died. The symbol, of course, is keyed to Jupiter, which via Pisces is one of the ruling planets for Joseph. But it has a printing error on the sigil of Jupiter that comes directly from Agrippa and the Magus, the 1651 Agrippa. Now, apologists, if you go on like Fair or Farms, whatever, they'll say, okay, in 1937, Biederman sold this Jupiter talisman. So he had a pecuniary interest, so we can't trust him. Well, 35 years earlier, he was telling the same story. And I mean, it's again, where there's smoke, there's fire. You can discount that, but how do you deal with all the other pieces of evidence that we're talking about? So basically, to kind of encapsulate what I'm saying is I believe Joseph was engaging these texts, particularly the Magus, potentially the 1651 version of Agrippa. I think it's a little more difficult because it would have been more rare. He was clearly using Kabbalistic concepts. So, for instance, Alexander Neibauer, who was a Jewish convert from Germany, he's in Nauvoo for several years. He was writing articles and essays for the Times and Seasons directly about the Kabbalah. He's writing, you can read him talking about the Sefer Yetzirah. And so you couldn't imagine today like an Ensign article about the emanations of the Kabbalah and the Tree of Life. But this was right in Joseph's newspaper. So when you think of concepts like Adam God, for instance, it is really the materialization of the Kabbalistic concept of Adam Kadmon, the cosmic man, the primordial first man. So Joseph is, I don't think copying directly. I think it's in his environment, and he's taking
Right.
it and he's fitting it into his own theological framework. So I personally think he was teaching Adam God. I don't think that's a Brigham Young invention. But my point is I think he was reading the Magus, and I think he was basically trying to Christianize, if you could say that, a lot of these magical concepts like the magic circle and theurgy and angels and astrology and the like.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. So you've submitted this work. What's the possibility that you're going to be presenting this in any kind of a public forum?
I mean, I won't say the publication right now just because it's under review, but it's one of the preeminent, ones that deal with Mormon subjects. So, I mean, if they accept it, I'd be happy to present it, anytime. I think, again, there's no piece of evidence where Joseph wrote an affidavit and said, I'm cribbing from these magical texts. And that's what apologists a lot of times, and I'm not a fan of apologetics of any variety, whether it's Christian or Muslim. I just think it's for believers to believe more. That's all it is.
Yeah.
But they'll say in essence, you don't have like direct proof. And I'm saying, no, but I have about, let's say 20 pieces of evidence that are directly in like phrasing, like the phrase, try the spirit, right? The article, try the spirits. That exact phrase is in the Magus, try the spirit. So like whether or not that's like coincidental, it could definitely be the case. But when you line it up with everything else, it becomes, I think, kind of apparent that there's some connection here that, is warranted exploring.
That's amazing. Absolutely amazing. Well, you are brilliant. Definitely not a lazy learner. I just love your work, and I want you to keep, working on this. I know you've submitted it to like the Mormon History Association, right? So you might be presenting it at that place with those people. I'll be
again.
In the front
row. I'd love to see it. I mean, again, it's the Peliel connection for me, and if I can just, Renee, just tell you one more thing about that, just so that's clear of how I came to that conclusion. So in the, I think it's the 1844 edition of the Doctrine and Covenants, when you read the DNC sections dealing with the United Order in particular, things that dealt with legalities and contracts and things of that nature. The 1844 edition uses code names for the individuals mentioned in those sections. So, for instance, Joseph Smith, hold on one second, Renee, my screensaver just came up. Joseph Smith is renamed Barak Ale. Okay, so if you read and this was, I think, until the 20th century, they kept the code name Barak Ale. Joseph even writes in his own journal that was Barak Ale was kind of referring to himself. So a lot of individuals have tried to interpret this. Like Orson Pratt said it was, it meant God bless you. I doubt Joseph would have taken like some code name for himself that's frankly that lame. Like that's my code name is God bless you. No, what it was is, if you look at Mormon angelology, right? So like, for instance, Noah is identified as Gabriel in the pre-existence. Adam is Michael, right? So Joseph is mapping these dispensational heads to traditional archangels. And one of the angels that is actually associated with Jupiter is Barachiel, who's mentioned in the Book of Enoch has him mentioned, but it's in the Magus, and it's also in the Agrippa's books of three books of occult philosophy. The point is that Barak Ale, if you use just Satius's transliteration guide, which was a Sephardic transliteration guide, you get Barak Ale, and they're like AU, for instance, is one of the reasons we know it's from Satius. Same with ale. So the theomorphic term El, like Mike El, Gabriel, El means God, right? Barachiel. If you use the transliteration guide, it becomes Ale, Ale. So Barachiel in Joseph's transliteration becomes Barak Ale. So this is my opinion, is that this is actually probably the more likely case. He's naming himself the lightning of God, right? So what do you think is more likely, this random term, God bless you, or an actual name that comes it's an angelic name, and it fits the pattern, again, of other dispensational heads being archangels. Well, if you use the same methodology and apply it to Paleal and reverse engineer it, you get Peliel.
Yeah.
And so that's where I got that. And when that happened and I looked for Peliel, it only appears in one place because it's a misspelling.
Yeah.
So we know it comes from the Agrippa Barrett tradition. And so that's what I'm saying is I believe it is Peliel. It is the preceptor of Jacob, God's spokesperson in the telestial world. And what you're being taught is the true order of prayer is now you've been given the technology, the technique, right? The ritual format in order to now call upon a divine messenger and have him appear. And you have to then test him, as Joseph tells you in his article. And so anyway, that's how I got some of that put together. And of course, the article goes in more detail.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's amazing. Well, all I know is Paleal is a lot better than, oh God, hear the words of my mouth. So I'm just grateful that I went through the temple when all of that good stuff was still in there. But what's fascinating to me is your explanation far exceeds what they claim when people will say, well, I don't understand the temple ceremony. And they'll say, well, you need to go more often. And then you'll start to see the symbolism and you'll understand it. I'm like, I think I could have gone every single day of my life and nobody would have ever explained the Paleal thing to me, unless you have the knowledge that you just gave us, which is not something that you're going to find in an everyday home. So it just absolutely mind blowing. I appreciate your work so much. It's just, and I don't know how you have time for this. I mean, you do have a career, you have a family. Yeah. It blows my mind but this is how people like you work, and thank heavens for people like you. So this is amazing. Well, thanks for joining me today. This has been so informative. And again, let me know anytime any of this, and you're going to be speaking anywhere, any place, anytime. I want to know because I'll be up front in the first row.
I appreciate it, Renee. Yeah,
so
no, great.
Fabulous.
It's been a great honor for me, mean that, and I'll keep you updated and can't wait to see the show when it's released.
Oh, that's great. I'll be doing that later this afternoon, so we'll get it posted. Thanks so much, Lance.
Bye.
And also tell everybody, because this, and you're so generous with this, tell everybody how they can get a hold of you or how they can follow you.
Yeah, you can contact me, lance.kennedy@gmail.com. I mean, it's really the last, I've only been on a couple of podcasts really talking about these topics, and I've gotten dozens of emails from around the world, stake presidents, bishops, people in high callings, really interesting variety of people who are all kind of, feeling the same way I have and been seeing the same things, but just don't feel like there's, there's no way to voice it. And so they're sitting and in their wards and in their congregations. And so if you feel that way, or your listeners do, or anyone, they're welcome to reach out to me, talk about anything. I'm pretty easygoing about topics. Nothing's off limits. And, I find this stuff to be really fascinating. So I'm always interested to hear from people and what they get out of these conversations and what I could do better.
Yeah. Oh, that's fabulous. Well, I appreciate it. And yes, everyone, contact him because he will blow your mind, and you will be just, what you do is you're like an appetizer. You just really get your hunger going, and you really increase that desire to have more information. So this is amazing. So thanks for joining me today.
Of course.
Okay. Bye-bye. Well, I tried to warn you. Was that not amazing? And I think that what Lance is doing is absolutely unprecedented. The work and the research that he's doing is enlightening so many people. And as I said, he's really going about it from a let's understand better. Let's understand where our beliefs are coming from, and not just blindly obeying. It's like, why do you believe this? Why do you do this? Why do you follow this ritual? Let me explain this to you. And it doesn't have to have a negative effect. It can be very positive. He's not saying anything negative about the teachings. He's just trying to explain where they come from and what they mean and what the purpose is. And it's just so beautiful. I just appreciate it so much. So thank you for joining me today. Please subscribe. I know you get tired of hearing people say that, but there's this weird thing out there called algorithm. And it really depends on you subscribing and liking and sharing. If you have anyone that has is kind of going through some of the same struggles that I had and what Lance was referring to as far as the rebranding of the church or things that are being taught over the pulpit that you've never heard before and you're confused, reach out to Lance. He would be more than happy to explain it more to you. And so this is why you share this. If anyone says to you, I don't understand that, or my daughter went to the temple for the first time and she felt very out of place, it's like, well, go and listen to this podcast. This might help a little bit. So anyway, thanks for joining me on Uncaged, She Became Visible. What key did today's podcast help unlock for you today? Think about that. Was it the key of identity? Was it the key of obligation? Was it the key of appearance? Was it the key that unlocks your grief that you've had? Maybe learning these things about the church has just sent you into a depression or a lack of identity. Lack of identity is one of the keys that we work on, because now you don't know who you are. I thought I was a Mormon. I thought my whole life, my husband and I were going to serve a mission. I was going to dedicate my whole life, and now I don't even know who I am anymore. Is that the key that this podcast is helping you unlock? Is it, what will people think if I leave the church? The lack of appearance. I don't even know how people judge me if I leave the church or if I question something as simple as a temple ritual. I don't know. So think about that. What are some of the keys that knowledge can unlock for you to get out of a cage that you've either put yourself in or that someone else put you in? So that is the purpose of my new Uncaged title to She Became Visible. So subscribe, like, and share. And thank you, Lance, for coming on the show today. It was absolutely astounding. So thanks, everybody. We'll see you again next week.